Good morning and welcome to this Training 20. We have got a Functional Friday session for you and it is focusing all on the squat. Now, this is all going to be like a how-to on squatting today. I'm not going to spend much time on how to stretch and improve the issues that we're going to be talking about. I did do a squat mobility Training 20, I think it was last week. So check that out if you're finding you have issues with some of the stuff today, but I'll talk you through that anyway. Because the main issues you're probably going to have today, if you've got tight hips or tight calves and ankles, they are the main limiting factors for being able to squat or squat lower than you currently can. But we're just going to go through the absolute basics, make sure you're doing this right, and some tips and tricks in order to always make sure you're doing it right, healthily, and how to improve it. So we're going to first off start with the basics of the squat. Now I did a deadlift last Friday, and I talked about how in the deadlift your bum goes backwards. So if you see I'm hinging from the hips here, my bum is going backwards to the wall like so. Now that is your hip hinge and that is your deadlift there, okay? What we're looking for is a squat. So we're sitting into our hips, and this time looking for our bum to go to the floor. So deadlift is a hinge, bum to wall. Squat is a bum down, sitting into your hips, bum to the floor. Okay, so always think bum to the floor like so. And straight away, using something like a chair or a box or a bed, sofa, whatever it is, just sitting down is a great way to start with your squat, because that's what you kind of do. You are sitting down into this position, sitting the bum down and back up like so. So if you're a total beginner, seated squats is what I always start people that are just starting out with their squats and trying to build up their leg strength. So you can see I'm just sitting down into that squat like so. So start with that if you're really struggling, but applied to this, we're going to go through some of the key points that you need to avoid and then things you need to make sure you're doing. So one of the first myths, first of all, that a lot of people were taught, I was taught this when I first became a personal trainer, and a lot of people have been told because of that, is that knees shouldn't go over your toes. So what I'm talking about is if I'm squatting here, that my knees shouldn't pass over my toes. That is a myth, that's a lie, that is not true. So first of all, forget that. That said, what we see a lot of is people leading with their knees. Now that is something we don't want. So what I mean by that is, if I ask someone to squat, they put all the weight into their knees, most likely their heels would come off. But what I'm talking about here is their movement starts with the knees dropping forward and they come into this position here. Most likely their heels start coming off. What you're doing here is putting all the weight into the knees, like so. So when we use a term, making sure you're keeping your knees over your toes, which is quite a common phrase used to train people with squats, it's not actually the best term we could use, because what we don't want to see is when you're putting all the weight into those knees like so, and the movement comes from the knees. The movement primarily comes from the hips, sitting into those hips like so. You can see here, my knees are over my toes, but I haven't driven forward with my knees. That can cause knee issues. So we don't want that. So what we do want is the tripod foot. And what I'm referring to here is, take this foot, nice flat base. We have got just below my big toe here is 0.1. Just below my little toe here is 0.2 on those padded parts of your foot. And 0.3 is your heel. So that's what I want to focus on when you're ever talking about squats, is this 3 tripods here, they all stay in connection with the floor when you're squatting. So let me take you through why this is the best way to start your brain thinking about how to squat. So let's take those 3 points. So you want to be able to squat with all 3 points staying connected with the floor. We're trying to grip the floor with our feet. So gripping the floor with your toes, not so much that you round your feet off and you lose that connection, but so you've got all 3 points down and sitting into that squat. So my little toe is down on the floor, my big toe just behind it is just connected, and my heels are down. That's where we want to be. What we can see with all three problems, if you lose any of those, is if you're too knee dominant, like I've just shown you, then your heels are going to come off. Put all the pressure on the knees, and it's obvious that we're losing those heels there. So that's one loss. What a big common thing is inactive glutes. If your glutes are inactive, it's very common to have a knee cave. And you'll see that happen if your little toes come off. So if I show you here, my knees come in, I'm losing that connection of my little toes. So they're coming up, side of the foot's coming upwards, I'm trying to squat in there, and all my weight's gone on the inside of my foot. That's what we want to avoid as well. And then finally, probably the least common, but does still happen, is over pronating and lifting the feet off. So it's coming off like this, so our big toe is losing connection. So squatting down like that, see how I've got a gap there, my big toe's coming off. We don't want any of those three things to happen. Now the reason I want to use this instead of knees over toes, is because knees over toes just simply also doesn't always apply. It's not descriptive enough, but also doesn't apply to stuff like sumo squats. So for example, if I take into a deep squat here, I'm going to sit into that squat. I've got my tripod position, so big toes down, small toes down, and heels down. But if you look, my knee is nowhere near over that toe, okay? So simply, that's one of the main reasons I want to use a tripod as your way of thinking about it too. So that's where you should start. Anyway, without anything else, just thinking about that tripod position at all times when you go into squat. Now, the reason it's hard to maintain that tripod sometimes is due to two main things. There are more, but generally the two main ones when it comes to squats are your hips and your ankles. Now, like I said, if you realize that your ankles and your calves are the issue, or you realize that your hips are the issue, either way, I covered both of them in the mobility squat session last week. So first of all, refer yourself back to that in order to find some ways of opening up. But what we're looking at here, we'll start with the ankles, is because you want to be able to get your knees over toes. So if I show you that squat again with my tripod position, I'm into that deep squat, my knees have gone over my toes like so. If you need to be able to get into that position, you need sufficient ankle mobility. And if you're tight here, tight in the front, then you're going to struggle to get that, okay? So making sure our ankles aren't too tight is number one. The other thing is being able to sit into those hips. Now being able to sit as low as you want to be able to hit a deep squat is tough if you've got tight hips. You're probably going to feel limited. You're probably going to be drawn forward with your chest like so, and you're going to be a lot hinging forward more than squatting into that depth position. And that will generally be due to tight hips. So there's a few ways you can go through this to avoid those situations. The first one is if you feel like you're falling forward too much, if you feel like those hips are too tight, then, and you're kind of falling into that squat, using a counterbalance to keep you upright is really helpful. So kettlebell, dumbbell, doesn't have to be too heavy. We don't want anything too heavy, because what we're going to do is hold it out in front of us, which allows you to sit back into that squat. So rather than hinging forward like so, I'm going to push that weight out in front of me as I go down and sit my bum backwards, still sitting it down into the floor. So sitting back like so. Now this counterbalance prevents me from falling forward and putting my weight too far forwards. Like I said, we're not, again, people talk about putting all your weight in the heels. Again, we want to keep it mid-foot, which is why the tripod foot really applies. But this allows you to really sit back into that position, as long as you're keeping those positions, by using this supported weight here, okay? Like so. So if your problem is you feel like you're dropping forward, that's due to your hips. So using a weight to assist with that can be really helpful. Bringing it back to the seated position as well, that can really help too. So again, people that lack the strength and the hip mobility will constantly see people not getting too low and losing this position here. You can see my bum's quite a bit higher than the chair. Yeah, if you ask them to go sit down on a chair this low, it's easy. They just simply sit down. Now that is partly because they're thinking too much about the squat and they're trying to overthink and how to perform the squat. But also, as you can see here, I'm not actually using much strength. I'm literally just sitting down and standing up, like so. So when you bring strength into it, it can make it harder in order to be under control, which then shows up where you're lacking strength and lacking mobility. But what you can do is use something like the seat to build up your mobility and your strength. So if you were to start off just literally sitting down, like so, what you could take it into is a controlled squat down. So what I'm looking to do is slow down the movement as best I can, rest and then stand up. Slow, 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 so trying to build up that strength until eventually you can just tap the box and come back up. So if I show you squat, 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 tap and back up. Squat, tap and back up. And then what you can do is stand on something or sit on something lower. Either way, what we're looking to do, I'll quickly show you. What we're looking to do here is increase the depth of your squat. So whether you're sitting on something lower or standing on something, now I have to squat into that lower position. So down I go, and now it's a deeper squat, working on that squat still, maintaining that tripod foot, that's always the key, like so. So that's the main function of the squat in terms of seated. And then of course you want to eventually bring it away, whether it's using a weight or just sitting into that position here. Now in terms of improving your depth, once you're in that position, again it's probably most due to mobility and training. You have to practice these things at the end of the day in order to improve on them. But so refer back to the mobility stuff, but also just keep practicing. Your squat will get lower over time. But what we don't want to see too much of, especially if we're weight bearing. If we're holding a heavy weight or even a goblet squat, we don't really want to see a butt wink. So I refer to butt wink. Clients always say that's a really weird word, but it's from America. They basically refer to as your pelvis tilting under, the bum hucking under. So if I show you here, so if I enter a squat, I'm still in a strong position, my spine's engaged and aligned. If I squat lower, you see that movement of the hips tucking under like so, where they round underneath, my hips staying strong and then they tuck under. This is, unless you've got really good hip mobility and ankle mobility, this is always going to happen at some point, unless you can have got a complete depth squat, which can be done. This is going to happen at some point, and doing it body weight isn't too bad because there's no stress on the spine. But if you were to have a heavy weight holding on you and you're uncontrollably squatting into that position where you're rounded like so, then you're going to put a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine down here. And when people get a bad back from squatting and stuff, it tends to be because they're rounding that bottom part of the spine, which is causing a lot of pressure there, rather than using the muscles like the core and the erector spinae to keep the spine braced and strong. Like I said, when you're squatting body weight, it's not too bad. If you're lifting heavy weights and you find your butt winking under, then you can eventually lead to some issues there. So what we want to make sure we're doing is, and obviously having a partner or a video or a mirror to see this, is to make sure that when we are using heavy squats, we're not squatting too low. So we're squatting to a depth where we're maintaining our strong position of our spine, keeping strong, the core's engaged, and back up. Now, stuff like the goblet squat, like holding a weight in front of you, probably increases your ability to sit lower into a squat without compromising the position. And still, and the same with having a weight on your back like a barbell, you probably will improve how low you can get because of the counterbalance of the weight, but still make sure that you're not compensating by tucking under by trying to get lower. And one thing you should practice if you think this could be a problem or you really don't want it to be a problem, which should be everyone, is the control of the squat. So first of all, not only feeling where you are tucking under, so I can feel when it kind of goes from strong position and round under, but also how fast and controlled you're performing the squat. So if I come down super quick like this, I am getting a nice depth, but there's no strength, there's no control there. So being able to perform a slow, controlled squat, opening up those hips and sitting down, and then I can feel when I'm going to lose that. Rather than being strong into that squat, I'm almost resting down on my calves and rounding under. So making sure that your sternum's in line, go for a slight lean forward, sitting down, bum down into those hips, into that controlled position, and back up. Okay, so making sure you've got that control when you're squatting is key. And I'm talking to you a lot about squats, but this is more of an educational video than anything else, to really go over any issues that most people have. I'm going to go back to the ankles next. So if the ankles are limiting you, then obviously mobilizing the ankles is going to be key. Using a weight can help there too. So even though it could be a hip problem that you're having, sitting down into this squat could actually just be the ankles. If you watch here, if I try and squat without my feet going over, I can do it here with this counterbalance. But if I try and do it without the weight, without my knees going over my toes, which will be prevented by tight ankles, it's a lot harder. You can see how low my chest has had to drop compared to sitting up here. So this hinge forward from the hips may actually be due to your ankles. There's a good way to test your ankles using a wall. Get your knee against it and reach. Can you touch when you're in this upright position? If you can, ideally you want to be a thumb and a fist away. So get a thumb and a fist away from the wall. Upright position. Can we still touch? I can just about touch here. We should be doing this with bare feet as well. But that is a really good ankle mobility. You want to at least be a fist away and be able to touch the wall here whilst keeping upright like so. If you can't, then that's a really good way to show that you don't have the right ankle mobility. So again, try it on both sides. This side for me is actually tighter. You can see that I'm just off the wall. Whereas if I go for just a fist, quite simple. A lot of people really struggle with just a fist. So if that's you, that's going to out your ankle mobility straight away. And you just improve that by mobilizing and stretching out and training the calves as well. Doing some calf raises. If your calves are always tight, then building up their strength as well as their mobility can really help. But yeah, if you think your hips aren't the problem, you're still finding you're falling forward and not getting into that deep squat, then test out your ankles. So if your ankles are preventing your knees from going over your toes, then that's going to be a big hindrance there, okay? I've totally forgotten the last thing I was going to talk about. Oh yeah, of course. So yeah, inactive glutes finally. So I showed you a squat earlier where we're losing our little toes. So the little toes are coming off and you're sitting down like this. Now, first of all, if you're maintaining that tripod, that shouldn't happen. But even so, this tends to be down to inactive glutes. So our glutes, our bum here, the muscles that should be working when we're squatting aren't working like they should be. And that's causing your knees to cave in and happen like so. Now, I'm not going to take you through a whole glute activation thing today, but if that is you, then you can get in touch with me. I can help you out with that. There's loads of exercise you can do, loads of ways to build out the squat, but what we really don't want to do is be squatting and seeing our knees caving in. That is not a good squat. What we want to see instead, when performing a conventional squat, there are squats that maybe, are you going for your close stance squats, But when we're talking conventional, we don't want to be losing those toes, knees caving in, and if that is primarily down to inactive glutes. So that is 20 minutes, ton of information there. I know I kind of overloaded that one, but there's so much to do on the squat. I may do another one of these depending on when I watch it back and see if I've covered everything. But I definitely didn't cover everything because there's so much to cover with the squat and there's so many different squats. But I hope that gave you a basic understanding of if you have issues or you want to learn how to squat, you should see all the do's and don'ts there for what to do next. If you have any questions or any issues, like I said, about the glutes or ways of improving the problems you have, then please message me. But otherwise, have a nice weekend, and I'll post next week's schedule on Sunday.